Welcome to today's lecture on the natural approach. Throughout this series, we have explored a range of teaching methods that have shaped language education. Today, we turn to an approach that emerged in the late 1970s and challenged many conventional assumptions about how language should be taught. The natural approach developed by Tracy Terrell and elaborated theoretically by Stephen Krashen represents a significant shift away from grammar-focused accuracy-driven instruction toward an emphasis on meaningful input, comprehension, and lowering learner anxiety. Unlike methods that prioritize structured practice and error correction, the natural approach draws on what some researchers at the time claimed were naturalistic principles of language acquisition. In this session, we'll explore what makes the natural approach distinctive, examine the theoretical framework that underpins it, and consider both its contributions to language teaching and the debate it has generated. But first off, let's look at the theoretical foundations. So the natural approach emerged from attempts to apply findings from second language acquisition research to classroom teaching. In 1977, Tracy Terrell outlined his proposal for what he described as a new philosophy of language teaching, emphasizing exposure and input over practice, and allowing for a prolonged period of listening before requiring production. What distinguishes the natural approach from earlier so-called natural methods is its explicit grounding in cognitive theories of language learning, while the direct method of the early 20th century also claimed to follow natural principles. It relied heavily on teacher monologues, repetition, and formal question and answer sequences. The natural approach, by contrast, places less emphasis on these techniques and more on comprehensible input and learner readiness. The theoretical foundation rests primarily on Krashen's 5 hypotheses of second language acquisition, which together formed what he presented as a comprehensive theory of how language is learned. So first of all, the acquisition learning hypothesis distinguishes between a subconscious acquisition, similar to first language development, and conscious learning of grammatical rules. Krashen argued that only acquisition leads to genuine communicative competence, while learned knowledge functions mainly as a monitor. The second one was the monitor hypothesis, which proposed that consciously learned rules can be used only under limited conditions, when learners have time, are focused on correctness, and know the relevant rule. These conditions are rarely met in spontaneous communication. Third one, the natural order hypothesis, that claims that grammatical structure are acquired in predictable sequences and regardless of instructional order. The fourth one, the input hypothesis, suggests that acquisition occurs when learners are exposed to comprehensible input that is slightly beyond their correct level of competence, what Krashen termed as I+1. Importantly, this input does not need to be finely tuned, as comprehension can be supported through context, visuals, and other extra-linguistic cues. And fifth, the affective filter hypothesis. It proposes that emotional factors such as anxiety, motivation, and self-confidence can either facilitate or block acquisition. So a low affective filter allows more input to be processed effectively. So together, these hypotheses led to clear instructional implications. Classrooms should provide abundant, comprehensible input, minimize anxiety, prioritize meaning over form, and allow speaking to emerge naturally rather than forcing early production. Now we're going to look at the core principles of the natural approach and its design. So unlike methods built primarily around theories of language structure, the natural approach is grounded in a theory of language learning. So Krashen and Terrell view communication as language's primarily function and argue that language is essentially a vehicle for conveying meaning and messages. So they place particular emphasis on the primacy of vocabulary over grammar. As Terrell argued, the quantity of information stored in the lexicon far outweighs that in other components of language, meaning that learners can often reconstruct messages from vocabulary even when grammatical accuracy is limited. So syntax alone, without words, cannot convey meaning. The approach is designed primarily for beginner learners progressing toward intermediate proficiency. After approximately, say, 100 to 150 hours of instruction, learners were expected to be able to communicate with proficient users of English without any serious difficulty. They were also expected to read everyday texts and dictionary support, of course, and possess sufficient language resources to continue developing independently. So accuracy is not the primary goal here. Comprehensibility, on the other hand, is. So the syllabus is organized around communicative goals and topics rather than grammatical structures. So instead of sequencing language forms, content is selected based on learner needs and interests, with materials often negotiated between teachers and students. Classroom activity progresses through developmental stages. In the pre-production stage, for example, learners respond non-verbally through actions, pointing or following commands, much like the total physical response, if you remember. In the early production stage, they produce single words or short phrases in response to yes, no, or either or questions. In the speech emergence stage, learners engage in role plays, express opinions, and participate in problem-solving tasks. This progression reflects the belief that learners should not be pushed to produce language before they are ready. Speaking is expected to emerge naturally once sufficient comprehensible input has been processed, and affective barriers, of course, are low. Now, let's look at classroom implementation of the natural approach. From the outset of a natural approach classroom, the emphasis is on providing comprehensible input in the target language. Teachers talk about objects in the classroom, describe pictures, and ask questions that initially require only nonverbal responses or minimal verbal output. For example, a teacher might say, "I see a red book on the table. Maria, point to the red book." Then move to, "Is the book on the table or on the chair?" And then later to, "Where is the red book?" This progression allows learners to demonstrate comprehension before being expected to produce extended language. As learners become ready to speak, teachers provide carefully graded language and structured response opportunities, moving gradually from closed to more open-ended prompts. Learners are expected to have encountered a word many times receptively before using it productively. Materials also play a different role than in traditional textbook-based instruction. The primary goal is to make language meaningful by providing rich extra-linguistic context. For example, teachers rely heavily on realia, such as pictures, schedules, flyers, and etc., rather than purpose-designed textbooks. Visual support is considered essential for facilitating comprehension and vocabulary development. Games are used extensively. They're not used as rewards, but as meaning-focused activities in which language functions as a tool for achieving goals rather than as the object of study. The natural approach also draws freely on techniques from other methods, including total physical responses I mentioned, direct method practices involving mime and gestures, and situational activities. What distinguishes is not the novelty of these techniques, obviously, but how they are organized within a framework prioritizing comprehensible input and an anxiety reduction. Teachers take on several demanding roles, serving as a primary source of input, creating a classroom atmosphere that lowers the affective filter, and managing a wide range of activities and materials based on learners' needs and their interests. These roles place considerable, obviously, demand on the teacher, language proficiency, planning, and classroom management. So these are some of the challenges for teachers who are using natural approach. Learners, meanwhile, are expected to take increasing responsibility for their learning. They help articulate goals, manage interaction, decide when to begin speaking, and negotiate the extent to which explicit grammar study is included. But let's look at the critical perspectives of the natural approach and, its relevance to contemporary language education. So the natural approach gained considerable influence in the 1980s, particularly in California, where Krashen's work significantly shaped approaches to teaching language minority students and bilingual educational policy. At the same time, it generated substantial debate. Critics questioned both the theoretical and empirical basis of Krashen's hypothesis. The strict distinction between acquisition and learning has been challenged, with many researchers arguing that explicit knowledge can contribute to communicative ability. The claim that learning cannot become acquisition remains particularly controversial. The natural order hypothesis has also proven more complex than initially suggested, with later research highlighting substantial individual variation. The input hypothesis, while intuitively appealing, has been criticized as difficult to falsify, since lack of progress can always be attributed to insufficient or inappropriate input. From a practical perspective, implementation presents some challenges. The natural approach offers no systematic coursebooks, requiring teachers to develop extensive materials independently. So, like I said, a lot of challenges for the teacher. It demands high level of teacher expertise, and in context with limited instructional time or exam-driven curricula, its gradual input-focused progression may be impractical. But despite these limitations, many principles associated with the natural approach have endured. The importance of comprehensible input, the recognition of affective factor, and the value of allowing a silent period before production have all been absorbed into later communicative and task-based approaches. Krashen's later advocacy of extensive reading contributes this emphasis on input-driven development. So, the natural approach represents an important chapter, if you like, in the history of language teaching. Whether or not one accepts Krashen's theoretical framework in full, the approach raised enduring questions about the role of explicit instruction, the importance of meaningful input, and the conditions under which language learning occurs most effectively. Its legacy lies less in its adoption as a complete method and more in its influence on later communicative, task-based, and learner-centered approaches. In that sense, the natural approach continues to shape how we think about language teaching today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.